Hi, my name is Matt. I work in developer relations at Replit, and today I'm going to show you how you can take Claude artifacts and deploy them in only a few minutes using Replit. And we're going to walk through using the Replit editor. We're going to walk through using AI within Replit because we now support querying Claude directly from the Replit editor. And then I'll talk a bit about Replit deployments and how you can take the code that you've modified and make it live on the internet. So if you're not familiar, Claude artifacts are simple applications that Claude can generate entirely on its own. They're really great for getting an immediate response and seeing immediate value, creating your ideas seamlessly in the browser. But one of the hard parts is taking what you've created, even if Claude gives you the code, and then running that locally or putting it on the internet so you can share it with other people. So today I'm going to show you how you can do that in Replit. And by the end of this demo, you're going to have your own working artifact that's live on the internet. This will be a relatively quick tutorial, but I'm going to make sure I cover all the concepts and discuss exactly the technologies that we're using, as well as my thought process for how I went about deploying this application. So let's jump right into it. Let's get started. This is the cover page for Repl. So it'll be in the description to this video, but it's what you'll see anytime somebody shares a template REPL with you, and it gives you a pretty quick glance of this project. It's kind of like a repository if you've ever worked with Git. So we can kind of see that there are some folders, we can see the files that are in these. And for this project, we're going to be using a Vite project, which is basically a way of scaffolding React projects, React being a framework for JavaScript. Now, if you don't know much about those things, don't worry. We're going to walk through it, and I'll tell you what you need to know to get this running. And you can learn more on your own if it interests you, but the amazing thing about this is that you really don't need to know a ton about the fundamentals of these languages. You just have to have a conceptual grasp of how things fit together. And if you pay attention during this video, I can promise you'll have that by the end. So there are a few files in here. App.css is a main app CSS file. CSS stands for cascading style sheets. It's how HTML styles itself. It's kind of a core tenet of some front-end development. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. You won't really need to. We're just going to get something running. The main application is located in this app.jsx file. And this is a JavaScript file, and this is the file we'll be editing during this video to get our application running. Now, the reason we're using the Vite framework is because out of all of the JavaScript frameworks for running React-type applications, it's one of the simpler ones. And we'll only need to modify really this file for the main JavaScript components. This was a choice that I made. You could scaffold your project using other JavaScript frameworks, and maybe after this video you want to learn more about some of them. I'd encourage that, actually. But I chose this because it was the fastest way to get started, and I thought the simplest way to show people how these technologies fit together. So our main app JavaScript file is going to use the CSS in index.css. Really, we're only going to need to worry about those two files. Main.jsx is sort of a wrapper for displaying the contents of app.jsx, and we won't need to touch it here. We really won't need to worry about any of these other files other than the config file when we're setting up something. So I'm going to click Use Template on this page, and I'll name this Matt's To-Do app. Big surprise, we're creating a to-do app. And then click Use Template. So what this is going to do is create a new REPL, and you can think about a REPL like its own development environment. REPLs, when created from templates, come pre-configured with everything you need to get things working. And we're going to talk through that just to make sure you fully understand what's going on. So you can also see that REPLs have AI chat. And our AI can use one of three models currently, which include GPT and Claude Sonnet. The other thing that's important is that our AI pane has access to the files in the editor. And on the back end, our engineers implemented retrieval augmented generation, which means that when you ask AI a question, it can have the context of all the files that live in your project and give you an up-to-date, accurate answer. It won't hallucinate anything. It won't give you incorrect information based on the environment. So that's really useful functionality. And something that I've already noticed makes a huge difference in the quality of the answers that this AI returns. So aside from that, it's important to note that this is its own environment. It's like its own container running in the cloud. And because of that, it has a file system. So if I run lsla, that'll list all of the files in this directory. And if you want to see the configuration of this REPL, you can go to these config files. Note that these might be hidden for you. you can unhide them by clicking the three dots and selecting show hidden files, and that'll make everything available. But in the .replit file, that tells us exactly how Replit is configuring this environment. And you can see that we have Node already installed. We have a run command. Oh, this should actually be npm run dev. And so that'll be changed by the time this is live. We have a run command that determines what happens when you click this run button. So we're going to do that right now, and it's going to execute npm run dev. And you can see that we're getting some output in the console. So the console is kind of like what's logged when we run something. It's specifically different than the shell. But you can see we have something live here at port 5173. Now, I haven't seen anything exposed, and when we get this message here, if I go to expose this port to the web by clicking that button, you can see we have a new ports definition in the .replit file, and we can see the default output for Vite-React projects, which is a really simple app that shows us how this is working. And it even tells us, hey, look, you can edit the source app.jsx file, and we'll see updates in real time. So if I find this Vite plus here, and I add like a heart, you can see that there's like hot reloading. So our app's going to update in real time, which is really nice. So that's a bit about Vite. That's a bit about Replit, and hopefully you're a little familiar with the editor now. What we're going to do is use Claude to create an artifact, but we're going to create that artifact within the context of this REPL. And there's some technologies that Claude uses that I'm going to walk through installing because they're commonly, they come out of Claude artifacts when you ask it to create certain applications. And so for our artifact today, we're going to create a to-do application. We're also going to use a few interesting frameworks, number one being the shadcn UI framework, which creates some pretty beautiful applications using JavaScript. And I'm going to show you how to configure that today as well. That requires Tailwind, which is a CSS framework for creating really beautiful applications as well. So I'm going to prompt Claude here. Actually, we'll turn off knowledge for this one. I'm going to say create a beautiful to-do application using shadcn UI and TailwindCSS. Assume a Vite-React app. So now Claude's going to do its thing, and we'll get something very similar to what we would get if we entered this into the Claude interface. Seems like there's a lot of stuff coming out here. Let's see what we got. So it's going to help us start and create the app. It gives us instructions on how to install things, to update the Tailwind config. We're actually not going to worry too much about that. I'm going to show you exactly how to do that in our context. But then it's actually building the app for us. So this is cool. So we'll copy this. We're going to put that in app.jsx because that is our main app file. And now we're going to go about configuring our project to use that shadcn UI library. So if I go over to the shell, I'm going to clear this out. And I'm going to run actually the first command that it gave us here because that was pretty accurate, which is that we need to install these prerequisites. So we're going to install Tailwind, PostCSX, auto prefixer, and then we're going to initialize Tailwind, which is going to add a Tailwind config file here. And then we're going to go back, and we don't actually need to add any of this to the Tailwind config. That's kind of unnecessary. So now there are actually some changes we'll need to make to the files in our project to make this library available to that main file. And the first is going to be in our Vite config. Actually, rather, we're going to have to, it goes in a different file, sorry. The first is going to be in a file called jsconfig. So we're going to create a new file, jsconfig.json. And this is going to tell our project some things about this library. And then I pulled this from the documentation, which I'll also link in the description. But we're going to add these compiler options. And again, you can find that in the documentation. I'll also make this REPL available for you to fork and play around with on your own. But this is going to help the component library direct where the components are being installed. And then there's really only one other change that we need to make, and that is to the Vite config. Again, I got this from the shadcn documentation. Whoops, looks like we're getting some errors there. But again, this is also going to help resolve some paths for the components that we'll install. So once that's done, we just have to run a pretty straightforward command, and that is npx shadcn-ui at latest, and we're going to say init. This is going to install a package and initialize our application. So we're going to get an interactive prompt that we can walk through here, and it should be pretty straightforward. We're not going to use TypeScript. We're using JavaScript for this one. We're going to use the default styling slate, and then our global CSS file is in source/index.css. We will use variables for colors. We don't need to worry about that. Just hit enter. We can just hit enter for the Tailwind prompts. That is the correct import alias, and that's the correct import alias. So I'll hit enter twice, and then no, we're not using React server components. Once you do that, you can type Y, and the library is going to initialize itself, and you're going to create this components.json file here. And this tells that component library exactly what we need it to. Now there's one final step here, and we'll be good to go, and that is we just have to see what components we're using. So we're using input, button, and checkbox for our application. And so to install these components, basically we're using this library to pull in components, which are like little building blocks. They're really nice front-end components, for example, like a button, that look better than the default components. So to do that, we just have to run add, so npx shadcn ui latest add, and then the name of our component. So input, button, checkbox. And because we configured all that stuff before, it's going to tell this command to install things to components UI. You can see there we just added these JavaScript definitions. So now if we go to our network, or our web view page rather, you can see we have a to-do app, and we can add a new to-do. So if I click add, awesome. Now, this is pretty basic, so let's talk through how we can improve this. But this is the important part, right? The important part is that we have things installed and configured, and now I can go back to Claude and iterate basically really quickly, making only changes to that project. So I'm going to say so one thing I noticed was when I press enter on this application, it didn't add a to-do. So we're going to list off some changes. Make it possible to add to-dos with the enter key. The other thing I noticed was that I can't edit to-dos. So I misspell things all the time. I mistype things. What if my to-dos change? What if my priorities change? Right? Priorities never change, of course. That would be crazy. But what if, right? Make it possible to edit to-dos. So we'll ask Claude to make these improvements. That's going to run through the app. And it looks like it's just editing the main file. So we're going to copy that once it's done editing, actually. Yep, looks like that's all set. We'll copy this, go to app.jsx, paste and save. What's up? Enter. It works. And then double clicking, looks like we can edit. And save. Beautiful. Okay, so this is better. And we can also prompt this for additional components. So check out shadcn UI. Again, I'll link all the stuff in the docs as well as the commands that I use to initialize this. But another really great component that is used in front-end development is like a card. So we could use more of a card interface to make this a bit more visually appealing than a very basic like web page. So what we'll tell Claude here, we'll scroll down to latest, is we'll say, make the main interface a card based UI. Adjust spacing for maximal visual appeal. So what I'm kind of going for here is like, I want this to be in a card centered on the page. I want it to look nice, like maybe have a drop shadow, and also to be styled nicely. I think it's already styled pretty well, but we're going to add, you can see now we're importing card and doing some other fancy things. So you can see like there's a flex grow class name that suggests that this might change on hover or on interaction. Let's copy this and see what Claude did for us. Oh, we didn't add card. So when we add new components, we just have to also add those using the same command we did earlier. So that's done. And now you can see we have a card. So my new to-do, and that gets its own card. Debatable whether that's nice or not. We could play around with that. But I kind of like this UI. I think personally, I would have a little bit more padding, but actually this looks quite good as the pages is expanding. So just like that, we were able to spin up a new application, get things settled with Claude, and then start iterating on our application. So I want to talk about the framework a little bit because I think it's important. You know, the first thing we did was set up our development environment, and Replit's really good for that. We made it easy to iterate quickly, right? We set things up in such a way that I could go to the prompt, the chat, and start iterating, asking things quickly. And it's a lot faster than going to Claude, going back to Replit, going back to Claude, etc. Now, if you're familiar with some other editors, this is possible too, right? What really sets Replit apart is that now I'm going to take this app and I'm going to deploy it to the internet in a couple clicks. So I'll show you how to do that. We also have a deployments pane, and I think something important to discuss is that deployments in Replit are a snapshot of this REPL. And what that means is that there's really no additional configuration required. Once you have something that works on this page here, it's very straightforward to deploy it. So let's walk through that together. So I'm going to create a new pane, and I'm going to go to deployments. And this is actually going to be a static deployment. So Vite apps and some Next.js apps compile to a set of pages, basically, of HTML files that then are deployed. So when we're setting this up, we're actually going to build our deployment and then deploy that snapshot. So let's click Set up our deployment. Let's set up a name. We'll do Matt's to-do app, and you can see that's going to be deployed to .replit.app. Now, if you had your own domain, if you wanted to build a tool for other people to use, you could buy that domain. For example, you could buy something like friend.com, which might be expensive, not quite sure, and deploy your app to that one, and then access that wherever you wanted to. But by default, we're going to use the .replit.app, and next apps build to the dist directory. So we're going to run npm run build when we build this, and then those files will be available in the dist directory. You can actually see this if you want to dig around, right, in package.json. What's happening is when we run npm run build, Vite is going to build the application and then output that to the dist directory. So I'm going to click deploy, and this takes typically a few minutes because we actually have to build it. But I think it's worth kind of talking through what's going on here. So this application was running in its own server, in its own development environment. And when we click deploy, a separate server is going to get spun up with, that was really fast. The deployment's already done, right? But a separate server gets spun up, and the commands we just asked get basically executed. And then that server is deployed to the internet as like a virtual machine. On the backend is a Google Cloud Run. We don't expose all of that stuff to you. But I just want to make it clear that if I make changes to these files here, that won't influence our deployment until we click redeploy. So that's an important piece. So I'm going to click this link, and it's going to take me to, ta-da, my to-do app. So we can add to get groceries, and this is live on the internet. This is really cool, right? I just built and deployed an artifact in about 20 minutes and under 20 minutes. And most of that was explaining exactly what I'm doing. So from this process should be pretty highly repeatable, right? You can even just fork the REPL that we already created. So if I go back to the app, right, you could theoretically just fork this, continue editing. You could fork the template I shared with you at the beginning of this again, and create something new. But I really wanted to show you a scaffolding. The scaffolding that I use when I'm developing apps with Claude Artifacts on Replit for building things really fast, creating an MVP, creating a prototype, and then deploying them on the internet without really needing to know much about the command line, without needing to know a ton of build commands or complicated logic, and really only needing to know and understand the fundamentals. And I think that's kind of the power of AI development. You don't need to know all the granular details and nuances. You just have to understand the frameworks and how they fit together. And so I'm planning on bringing quite a bit more content of this nature, of how you can create ship, build very quickly, and get things out the door. You could imagine using artifacts to build an internal tool that can help your team to build a personal website, or even a product that you want to launch. So again, I'm Matt in Developer Relations with Replit, and this has been how you can deploy Claude Artifacts on Replit. Until next time, peace.